By Mr. Kevin Klein, who's here today, about some property that he has control over on Hickory Street, on the section of Hickory behind C&E Grocery Store and Hardware. He owns a vacant lot there, is in the process of purchasing or has purchased another lot that has two structures on it, and has the option also to purchase another lot and a half where there's an existing concrete parking lot. What he would like to do there is well, the preliminary discussion was about having 3 units in one building. Of course, Title 41, the new site plan review ordinance, requires that when you have 3 or more units in a building, that's no longer reviewed or approved administratively. That has to come to the Planning Commission, so that's why Mr. Klein is here. There's quite a bit of information that needs to be submitted in order for a complete application to start the time frames that are required for action by the Planning Commission. What Mr. Klein would like to do is kind of review the project with you today, try to get an idea of what you may or may not need in order to have an application submitted and stamped complete. So administrative departmental input can take place because that's another requirement, written input from different departments. And so that's kind of why, so this is almost like a pre-application meeting for a subdivision or a PUD. Essentially, that's what we're doing today.
Okay, so we have not, you have not necessarily received all this information that's listed in here.
Exactly. I provided you all the information received from Mr. Klein.
Okay.
Just maybe to give you a little bit more background, too, on the property. Although it abuts the B2 business zone on Richland Avenue, the zoning on that side of Hickory Street is R1, single-family residential. One of the parts of Title 41 says that any recommendations from boards and commissions should be received prior to action by the Planning Commission. So in this case, it would take a variance from the Board of Zoning Appeals to construct a building with more than one unit, short of a rezoning of the area.
So what you're saying is that he would have to go to the Zoning Board of Appeals first to get a variance, and then come back to us?
That's what happened, for example, in the case of 176 Mill Street. There was a rear and side setback variance that was required. And the applicant went to the Board of Zoning Appeals and was granted those variances first. So in a way, the board will probably be good for you to review that section of the code too. It talks about recommendations of other boards and commissions. So I don't know if going to the zoning board is a recommendation or not under the language of the ordinance, but that's how it was done the first time. And so in a way, you're kind of you're initially at the mercy of the Board of Zoning Appeals to consider, for in this case, let's say 3 units instead of 1 in an R1.
Now, if the Board of Zoning Appeals doesn't grant that variance, then we would be back to talking about this could only be done with a rezoning.
That would be an option, I suppose, yes.
What is the other option?
We can appeal.
I said that would be another option.
Okay,
There wouldn't be any other one. Well, there would be. Individual units could be constructed on each lot, a building. And part of Mr. Klein's argument, I think, is probably in your letter, or in a letter. It was in with the documents I provided to you. Is about that. That could be allowed, but is it really efficient to do it that way? I mean, tear up an existing parking lot, create additional exterior walls that need insulation and heating and cooling, more siding, more face area. It could be accomplished, because there are enough lots there and they're not combined, where you could build, 3 different single-family dwelling units. His idea is just to consolidate that all down. So does that make sense for a variance? Well, that's for the Board of Zoning Appeals to determine. Yes, sir.
Okay, so again, having been on zoning board of appeals, I get the impression they really wouldn't be able to do this, because if they have to create a variance to going through the findings, this is a question, of course, minimal variance for the use of the lots. Some of these things would fall down. It'd be very difficult. I would look and say it's probably easier to rezone this, provided we look at the comprehensive plan. I know Paul Logue has give us a packet on some of the stuff that was in the comprehensive plan about Richland Avenue. It's a little bit contradictory because they talk about single family, but at the same time they talk about intensification of use for that corridor in terms of residential and business.
Yeah, the way Title 41, it appears, has been set up is a little different than planned unit development. Because in a planned unit development review, the Planning Commission makes recommendations for variance to City Council. The Zoning Board's not involved. So you have kind of the same kind of review through the Planning Commission. In this case, though, you're working with the Board of Zoning Appeals and other boards and commissions and not working with City Council. So, and this is all brand-new legislation, so, everybody's just kind of trying to feel their way through it here and do the best they can.
But does the Zoning Board of Appeals actually have the power to put a triplex in an R1 zone?
They recently, and within the last couple of years, they did approve a building it wasn't in an R1 zone. It was in a B1 zone. That the only thing that surrounded it was R1. And so you can only have a single-family home, but they granted variance for multiple units in a single building.
But it was zoned, they're not a
The zone
zoning
was
board, they're
B1.
an appeals board, I think. I'm just, again, I'm looking at the findings that they have to go through, and how would you be able to, approve this, given the 6 findings that you have to go through in the Zoning Board of Appeals? And that's, I guess, looking at the limitation of that. Okay, I'm just asking procedure, really. It's more procedure than anything else.
Yeah, you might want to review that section of Title 41.
Okay.
I'm picturing it in my mind. It's the bottom of the first page and the start of the second page, where it talks about recommendations of boards and commissions. What does that mean?
What does that mean? Recommendations versus
Permits,
approval?
approvals.
Can we recommend to the bonings or
To grant the variance, for example?
Well, we encourage looking at this in an expansive view. You know what I mean?
I think that's probably one of the reasons why Mr. Klein wanted to come ahead of time here and speak with you, rather than go to the Board of Zoning Appeals and, kind of blind, in the dark, kind of feeling our way through it, to be maybe subject to final approval being not able to be obtained because they weren't able to, to grant the variance.
Offhand, I probably prefer the process where we rezone this. Then the Zoning Board of Appeal doesn't have to come into play unless there's setback issues or of some nature.
Right, lot coverage or parking.
Lot coverage,
or something
yeah,
like
and at
that.
that point, I don't think, looking at these lots, that wouldn't be a problem. But I know the process to rezone is a little bit longer, but I think it's less confusing. In other words, if we were to rezone this, then the Zoning Board of Appeals is not involved. The Tree Commission may be involved. I don't even think that.
The
no, it's not.
requirements of
Title 41.
41 would be, and so the Tree Commission would still be.
Okay.
But, that's not.
Right.
That's not that onerous.
But Title 41 is really it's a pick and choose. We have to say why some boards and some things are required or aren't required. I mean, right now, probably for this piece of property, floodplain issues aren't really required, but hillsides are probably required. For tree, maybe commission may be required, but is disabilities required for that? Maybe so. I don't know.
Well, there's also the question about if you rezone, what are you talking about rezoning? That whole block of Hickory Street or that spot?
I know. And then comes spot rezoning.
And it seems to me it's reasonable, since that faces the back of business establishments and so on, that block might be rezoned, but you've got then another property owner or two to talk to about it.
Yeah, and then at that point, we're talking about how large an area do we want to rezone? It's B2. And R3 can go into B2. Yeah, this is Richland here. It's a good question whether the other places is everybody adjacent to that area.
If you stopped at the corner of Canterbury, that would make sense because the character of the B2 in front of it is different after you cross Canterbury and go north.
Okay.
But and it's not as much a spot zoning question, seems to me, as it would be if you didn't have those unbuildable woods behind it, so that it's not going to be bang up against somebody's R1 lot that they can...
Yeah, the hillside prevents any development
Yeah.
on that back end.
Yeah.
And these are fairly deep lots, granted.
Well, why don't we let Mr. Klein make his presentation to us, and then decide what we want to recommend to him as far as proceeding.
If I could, just one more thing. I want to point out another difference, too, between Title 41 reviews and planned unit development reviews. In the case of planned unit development, the zoning code says that can occur in any zone. So if there were a proposal for multiple buildings, if there were 2 or more buildings, this would be a planned unit development, and then a variance wouldn't be necessary, because PUD is principally permitted even as early as an R1 zone, so long as you go through the process. So
But he
that's why
wants-
we're here looking at it.
Yeah,
1 building, Title 41, 2 or more buildings would be a PUD.
but if he wants to build it as one building for energy efficiency and so on, that's something that we ought to be encouraging. So,
Is there a possibility of putting it under a PUD? We put, smaller, there's certain thresholds for PUD. One of them is size of...
2 acre minimum.
2 acre, and we've given variances for that so that it could go under a PUD.
Traditionally, 2 or more buildings has been considered a planned unit development, 2 or more residential buildings, or a building, single building with mixed use, or multiple buildings with mixed use have been a planned unit development.
and we can't consider 3 connected buildings as one, 3
Well,
connected,
I don't think,
There's
can't
not mixed
consider it as
use.
3 connected
There's not mixed
buildings.
use in it,
Yeah.
it's all residential use. So I think that by definition, a PUD has mixed uses in it.
Is there mixed use in that one on Union Street that Jim Cody has?
No. That was a planned unit development because it was 2 buildings.
Oh, okay. Okay, shall we ask Mr. Klein to make his presentation?
First of all, thank you for allowing me to come and take your time today. This is all very new to me. This is my first time ever doing anything like this, so I kind of came prepared, but yet I've got the jitters in trying to get through this, so.
Well, it's obviously sort of our first time of doing
Okay,
something like
well,
this,
we'll learn
too.
together
so-
then. But I've done some background work on this, talked to many people, and felt very encouraged and positive about this project. But just give you some background quickly of who I am. I'm a lifelong resident of Athens, grew up here, went to school here, continue to work and raise a family here. I work for Columbia Gas, I've been there for 28 years, and have a genuine concern for our community. I have aspirations and concerns for our community. I've been involved in nonprofit events in this community and many other things like United Appeal and CPAN and tree festivals and various things that I've been on the athletic boosters at the Athens High School for last year as well. I'm a property owner, obviously, of my own home and an investment property owner. I have 10 currently, so I'm not as big as a lot of people in town, but I learned a little bit about this. I have 2 multi-units, one on West Washington, one on West State Street, and my purchase criteria is that if I will not live there, I will not purchase it. I want it to be quality, I want it to be nice, and I want to be able to fill the property, and so that is my motto, so to speak. And I actually brought pictures of the West State Street building that I did 2 years ago, which is the old Dave White Services building, or the auction house, used to be the big block building. Personally, I think I took an eyesore and made it into something much nicer, so I hope you can agree.
didn't you get an award for that?
I'm sorry?
Did you get an award for the tree commissioner for that?
I think I did get some kind of award or recognition,
Okay.
and I will have to say, at first going into that, I was a little reluctant in working with the committees, because you hear all these stories on the street about working with you all. It went so well. They taught me so much, and I've learned, and Steve could vouch for this, I don't do anything without going to see Steve or someone at the code office, because I want to do it right, and I want to learn from it and go that direction. And that's why I'm here, probably a little premature today than maybe I should be, but I want to learn with you all and do this the right way if I can. So, again, my goal or my reason for being here today is for guidance and support moving forward with the project on Richland Avenue corridor. I did do my look at the corridor as well and see that where I'm looking in relationship to the B2 zoning and all that is right out the the front step. I mean, the street's the only thing divides, and there's a huge buffer between this property and, the foothills going up to Canterbury and those residential areas in R1. My project goal is to create decent, safe, aesthetically pleasing housing with a mixed neighborhood of business and residential. The housing would be will fill the needs for families, working professionals, and retired members of our community who want close proximity to campus and uptown, but then the conveniences of the grocery store, hardware, transportation right there with the city transportation, city transit system on Richland Avenue. The proposed project is the site of 30, 32, and 34 Hickory Street, which is currently a concrete parking lot of C&E, and I've talked to Lee Jones about selling that to me. We have a gentleman's agreement as of today or a week or so ago on that one. 32 Hickory, I have a purchase agreement already signed between the property owners and myself. It has 2 inhabitable properties on it. I have pictures from inside. They need to come down. I can't imagine anyone trying to fix them up. They've got foundation problems to just really serious age problems. And then the property at 34 Hickory, I purchased it last year with intentions of doing something with it. And as I went over and looked at the property, and more so if I've been there cutting grass, I've looked at my neighbors thinking, those 2 structures have to come down, and maybe I can be the one to do it to improve this neighborhood. So the area is depressed. It's not the most desirable due to directly behind the 2 large commercial buildings being the C&E, the tire store, and such. The backsides of these businesses present challenges for anyone to consider this being their permanent residence, but I do think that the type of housing that I'm proposing would fit there. My proposal is to remove the old structures from 32 Hickory and build 3. I'm saying this now because it's a change. I worked with an architect already this week, and he has given me some really good ideas on how to make it more appealing than the one big box apartment building, 3 units, and to utilize the parking lot that is already there. His idea with me was to build 3 duplexes in a courtyard configuration, each unit having a 3-bedroom unit and a 2-bedroom unit. And that configuration would be, 2-bedroom unit would be a ranch style, so if there were elderly that would want no steps, that from the parking lot they could get directly to the 2-bedroom units. The 3-bedroom units could be for families. I'm not real, I guess it would be for anyone, obviously, but students is not really the direction I'm going, but obviously within the regulations, it would be something I would have to consider. But with it being 3-bedroom and 2-bedroom units, the footprint, from what I've done with some studies of the property already, the current structures that are there and the one that I was going to build on Hickory are greater footprint and land coverage than the 3 units would be. The design would have very little environmental impact. The footprint structures is approximately 225 square foot more than exists on 32 Hickory alone. That is about a 12 by 18 structure right now. Utility infrastructure is already there in place. The concrete parking lot at 30 is ample parking for about 21 parking spaces. And with my proposal of doing 3 duplexes, I only need 15 spaces because each building would have a 3 and a 2, so that's 5 to 3 times over, so 15 parking spaces. Again, I consult with the city code office and city safety director, architects, and various people that I can just to listen to me and find out if I'm going the right direction, maybe going with the right idea. And after meeting with the architect this week, I'm more encouraged about the 3 separate buildings to make it look more residential than one big box building again in that environment. It just seems to be a better way to go. I went over to Elliott Street and took some pictures of a duplex or a courtyard brick building over there to get some idea of what the architect was telling me about. That's much larger than what I was considering. I also went down to, I think it's Diversity Properties, the yellow type, you go mill iron and back into them. And that's the kind of the look I would like to do. I brought pictures of them as well to say, that's the kind of the look of a 2-story on one side, a ranch on the other kind of, design. And then they would have a courtyard thing to where the way they'd be facing would be north, which would be looking across the parking lot to the one residential house that's there right now, rather than everyone facing Richland looking over the eyesores I brought pictures of, stacks of pallets and bundles of cardboard and forklift, but it'd be a way to make it more appealing to people who live there. I really feel there's a need for this kind of housing in that area because most of the places in that area are huge. Professionals don't really care to live among the college students, possibly due to some of the environment that they bring with them. But I'm starting to ramble, but I'm just going to stop there and let you ask me questions because, as my children say, I can talk forever, but I'm very excited about the idea here. Again, I come to you because I want guidance and direction from you all. Is this a possibility, or do I stop where I'm at and go on and build what I've got a permit and plans to build on my current lot that I own there on Hickory? But I'm willing to forego the permit and the money that I put into that to maybe do something better for the neighborhood.
Now, what you're suggesting at this point is 3 separate buildings.
Right.
So it could be a planned unit development with a variance for lot size. Doesn't have to have mixed use.
Right.
So we've just jumped from Title 41 to planned unit development.
Right.
And you've scaled up, so what was before was 9 total bedrooms, now it's 15.
Right.
Okay.
But is it 3 buildings? Do you have like a schematic of what
I
you?
don't, because this
Okay.
just happened just this week.
Okay.
But what it would be a footprint of, I did make some prints here somewhere of, what would be, should I bring them up to you?
Yeah.
Okay. This is what I'm thinking, is something like this kind of a structure. Obviously, more of an architect design to it. There would be a floor plan of something as such, and it is, I think, 40 by 28. So the footprint of the 3 buildings would not be any greater than what I'm proposing right now.
Right.
There would be separate buildings looking like 3 houses instead
Like-
of one big lot.
Like you're kind of thinking like
Yes.
this, around a center court, or
Yes.
that would be common space
Yes.
for the. So now we're talking about a PUD.
Yes, but when you start talking about duplexes, one's going to be what, 2 bedroom, 3, 2, 3, 2, 3?
Now, each unit would have a 3 and a 2. as-
So they would be kind of like that on this. Do not laugh at my architectural drawings. This is why I did planning instead of landscape code. So it'd be a tall building and a short building next to each other.
Right, like one would have, yeah.
See, and there's the little windows, you see. Okay.
That's good, the windows are very good.
Well, it helps.
I mean, I really don't know. I mean, I'm learning just as of, honestly, yesterday. This was the idea presented to me by the architect. And I was like, oh, I'm going tomorrow. I don't have any of this down. So I pulled off the internet some things last night. But to me, this seems to be more inviting for the use of the property, make it look more residential than another big apartment.
Well, I mean, good design, just because you have more units doesn't mean that the other design is better, because, there's a huge difference that design makes, in intensifying. See, the doors help too.
Yes, the door's very nice.
Well, I have to say, design does help because the architect involved with shall I go back to the table?
Yeah, so the mics are on.
The architect that designed the exterior of the building on West State Street really gave that a different appeal. And we used different color siding and tried to make it look like something more than just a big box wrapped in vinyl siding. And that's kind of where I'm going with this as well. I want it to look nice and be nice and be appealing to the neighbors as well. I'm concerned with that. I did talk with Ms. Hahn before the opening of this, and I have not contacted that next door neighbor on either side. I just haven't had the time to, and it really just kind of slipped my mind. But
Well, until you know what you want to
Right,
do, there's
right,
not a lot of point.
right.
Yeah.
But I will have to say that my neighbors on West State Street have been very pleased with the project there, and that's kind of the reputation that I'm bringing to the table. That's what I'd like to do.
Now, are the houses that are currently there, the ones that need to be torn down, are they inhabited?
Yeah, they are.
They are?
They are?
Yeah, they are.
Okay.
I've got pictures of them. They're pretty bad.
They're rentals, I assume?
They are
No.
not.
They're
not.
No, this was a family property, and they've sat vacant for at least 2 years because they can't do anything with them where they currently sit. They can't come and get a permit for making them into rental. Now, he was in the process of doing so with the garage apartment, but there's foundation problems with that and lots of others, but the roofs leak and so on. But the house itself, being on the property, it's really in bad shape. You've got to watch walking around. The floors are so bad, and I don't know, if that's the way it has been. But it's one of those older places that's been around for years that they've added on here and added on there, and it's just hodgepodged and not very efficient for any kind of, energy efficient, so.
Okay, so really what we've done is we've kicked it into the PUD process at this point, which doesn't mean a zoning change, it takes it out of Title 41.
Right.
Yeah.
But that would mean also that you wouldn't have to go in front of the zoning board
Yeah,
of appeals.
sure.
So, I mean, that seems almost like the easier process to go through this.
That's why I'm here today. I mean, what do you all think? You're the professionals that's been doing this a lot longer than me and know more about it.
He's behind you.
Like I said, I'm coming today for guidance on, is this the way to go? Or, my original design was what I was going to do, but I've learned that I can do something a little better and more appealing, and not just another big box building behind the CNE market type of thing, so.
Harry, do you have any questions?
No.
What do you think? Have any opinions?
I mean, I think it sounds good, the approach.
Paul, do you have any suggestions or comments?
Come up to the mic so people can
It's-
hear you there.
yeah, it's,
We're going to make you as public as possible.
It's not fair to just suddenly drop this on you when you were here.
The only, I guess the only thing I'm questioning would be the increase in density. When we were talking about it earlier, it was going to be 3 units, which was, basically came along with, it was 3 units on 3 parcels, so there wasn't an increase in density, it was just clustering it together, but now we're increasing the density, so. But as a PUD, it seems like it makes some sense to me.
This area, this has transportation along it. How far does the bus access?
Shoot, I don't know.
I mean, theoretically.
It goes down as far as the Century 21 office
Okay.
BP, I think is,
Okay.
it goes as far out as I think the Athens apartments are coming down Richland.
Right.
So-
Bus
Yeah,
goes all
because-
the way to Mount Sifty.
Right,
Yeah.
okay.
United
Right.
Roofing, yeah,
Yeah, okay.
So it has a bus system.
yes.
I mean, this seems, just on the take of increase in density, is that it's not a huge increase in
Right.
density, and that it's more of a scale issue. We've talked a lot about scale before, and this seems more appropriate scale than producing one huge 600-bedroom building. There's a difference in scale. This seems to me a more appropriate scale
Yeah.
to increase density with.
And I
Right.
think the scale also brings a different type of resident than what
Right.
you alluded to.
Yes.
Yeah.
And
Well,
that's what I'm looking for. I have lots of calls from people wanting nice places to live away from campus a little bit because they are associated with the university and they don't want to live way out, but yet they don't want to live in among a lot of what's going on.
Right.
Or in the big places,
Right.
you know.
Well, and I think that the fact, a lot of what disturbs me when people come forward is making these 5-bedroom apartments, 4-bedroom apartments, and you know that that's the sort of place that definitely is going to attract a certain clientele. And I know a lot of people, who want to move into town because their kids are gone or whatever, and they want to move into town, that are having a hard time finding 2- and 3-bedroom places.
Right.
I think that that's an encouraging.
Well, one of the things I looked at was in building this, that there are units, or all of the units in my first proposal were ground level, so that there's not steps involved. I have a mother-in-law who lives on the east side, and this would be an opportunity to put her closer to us because we're right around the corner on Pomeroy Road. I live in this neighborhood, so I'm thinking toward the future that it might be someplace that she would live near us.
And if you design the 2-bedroom apartments with that in mind.
Right.
That's great. I mean, I think that's a long-term vision that's encouraging. More people have
Accessibility?
it. Yes.
Right.
Wider doorways and stuff.
Okay.
Okay, I'm pretty much for this idea, I like it. I guess the caveats I look at, and looking at the parts of the comprehensive plan, it looks like this is where we'd want to go in Richland in some sense. I guess the caveat I would say is the hillside, if it's very slip prone, how much you're going to be disturbing that. You're at the toe of a hill, technically. And that's just technical, that's just, engineering in one sense, but also.
And talking with the architect yesterday, the one unit toward the street would have a basement foundation in it. The others would be on grade, slab or somewhat of a crawl space, but not much disturbance to the hillside from what's already there. Just once the properties were, the structures that are there were taken down, of course, some doing some grade improvement and stuff like that, but there's no plan to cut, 30 feet into the hillside type of thing and all that, no. I want to keep the trees that are there and all that's up through there just the way it is.
I look at the parking lot as not the easiest one to get in and out of. I mean, this plan wasn't altering the parking lot.
No.
Once you start designing, your planning and development here, it may modify it, because trying to create a courtyard around that may be difficult. But, I don't know. I guess we'll probably make a motion on it.
Well, if you make a courtyard that's horseshoe-shaped and open toward the parking lot, you
Right.
don't have to go around it, but you could maybe make the driveway a little bit easier to get into.
The plan was to use the 32 and 34 properties for the construction and leaving the parking lot alone, that it would be a U-shaped courtyard facing that direction.
Okay.
So,
Do you want to, is it possible to ask Chris, the south side?
Well, I was going to say, this is, theoretically, we're not supposed to have a discussion until we have a motion, but we're not going to make a motion about this
No.
anyway. So would anybody in the audience like to speak?
Shall I go up there?
Just, yeah.
Or there, yeah, Chris.
Or there, yeah.
It sounds encouraging. I'm not sure I understand quite the details because I don't know I'm not familiar with the lots, the 30, 32, and 34, where they are in relation to C&E, but certainly to have something that's in scale with the buildings.
this is C&E right here.
Mhm.
All this blue.
Okay.
Just the
And
right
so
way.
then this is the residential
Right, that is
that
the one.
faces there. And that would be my only concern when it gets far enough along and appropriate, that there is a design to discuss with the residential there, that's the one residence. And then, they are pretty much residential even on the other side, as you indicated, Peg, on the other side
Yeah.
of Canterbury.
Now, I think, and if we did a zoning change, it is probably not appropriate to go on across Canterbury. It would be just for this part of Hickory.
And with the zoning change, that wouldn't necessarily be required if you do the PUD.
If it's a
correct?
PUD, you
So
don't
that's
have
what's
to, yeah.
appealing about this. But certainly the smaller scale, in fact, I've had comments just last night from somebody who lives in the south side who was making comments about the large apartment complexes going in and not seeing those as favorable to the community. So this definitely would be.
Well, this looks as though it would be a possible place for a family with children, and there are not very many of those.
Exactly. And if we could encourage C&E then to brighten up some of their environment around that might be a...
Paint the back of it red.
ABC.
I know,
And this is the
Do we need
there's the
some kind of,
I
A
think-
suggestion, I think. is
A
what-
I
suggestion,
need
yes.
some, if you would please, give me some guidance on where I go from here and what I need to do. And
Steve,
If we would have started today through the plan unit development process, this would have been the pre-application meeting that's required, which is described as an early and informal meeting where the planning commission makes the applicant aware of certain development criteria that the city has, which essentially is what we've done.
Right.
We pointed out challenges with slip-prone soils possibly, landscaping plans reviewed by the tree commission, some variances that might be necessary for area. So, we could have
So
another
that's-
pre-application meeting if Mr. Klein would like to bring some more, a little more detailed information in, rather than start in with a possible preliminary approval. Because there's fees involved with all of this once you take the step, in. There are
Okay.
application fees and the requirements for preliminary approval for PUD are not that great. Then there's detail that you have to work on between preliminary and final. So, we can proceed in the direction as quickly as Mr. Klein might want to go with another pre-app meeting or go right to preliminary, depending on, he and I can discuss that too. And I
Okay.
can run down through the requirements for preliminary application for a PUD also.
The only other thing I was thinking that might be good for us to see fairly soon would be an elevation.
height of the building?
Well,
Just a-
just a drawing of
Okay.
what it would be like. What- I mean, I think
I
we
would like
all
to see
have
that
metal
too,
pictures.
so I'll work toward that. Right.
I just did some quick calculation, just so you know, too. There are 5 parcels involved here, and they look like they're almost an acre total together, around 40,000 square feet. So we're
So then we
talking
need a variance.
almost still need a variance for the 2 acre minimum, but this isn't, it's a little more than just a couple lots. It's almost an acre.
It's bigger than Procus. Is it?
Oh, yes.
Approximate, yes. So-
Okay.
About twice as big.
Yeah. I like the look of it. I guess my concern is elevation, and I try to visualize what these buildings would look like. I think the density is appropriate in the size. I also worry about the toe of the hill and making sure there is that, as you say, preserving trees towards the back, so, because you will have, you are one that's there. I got to look at it. I've looked at the site twice so far just to check it out. And I know it needs improvement. I guess somewhere along the line in the PUD process, we want to look at infrastructure too. I don't know how, I don't remember seeing a fire hydrant. That was one of the things that came to mind just now. Because that would be in the Title 41. And I didn't think about it because I thought that would be in the process. But once we start talking about PUDs and stuff like that, we have to start thinking about other infrastructure. But other than that, I'd say a preliminary is the next step, really, another informal dialogue, I thought would be the way to go. But that's just me. There's other members here.
You want to see anything particular?
That sounds
I think I would encourage, when you're looking at starting the design, is to look, my concern is with the parking lot and kids. If you want to have, and try to look at some of the safety issues involved, because so many of these areas are just, I have 2 kids, and I'm always thinking, but I'm encouraged. I think that it can be a great project, and I think that your attitude, I must compliment you on your attitude about how you do rental development, because I think that's a attitude that if more people had in this town,
I agree.
We wouldn't be having as much discussion about regulations and such. So I think that I'm very encouraged, and I think that's great. And you should be commended. So probably when we get a picture, it's easier to talk around a picture.
Yeah.
Right.
So.
But that could come with the application of the preliminary approval.
I do have some pictures of those buildings that I took 3 of them because I thought, well, we could kind of show how this might look. But these are the type of buildings that I was thinking of, the look of,
That's
nicer
80 or
shed.
90 mil, is that?
This is down on the mill iron.
Okay, mill iron.
Yeah.
I can bring those so you can see quickly, but this is what I'm thinking is, they're going to be 2-story, look like, individual residences.
Right.
Rather than a big complex, so.
Right.
And my thought was to put like all 3 of these together and say, that's kind of how it was going to look.
Show that side of the,
Yeah.
where is it?
I think, yeah, working with an architect to come up with the right kind of design, but my focus is to make it
We'll find out. You want to say something?
a mixed use, family and elderly.
Well, it certainly fits with some of the other things they've said
Well,
in the comprehensive
grocery store
plan.
just being
but-
right there is a great thing.
Right.
You just walk out the door and go down and pick up groceries and any other kind of needs you might have at the hardware store,
Right.
as well as transportation. And this is coming from some of my experience with, I had a tenant that came to me about 8 years ago from California, and she didn't have a car, but of course in Athens she did purchase one. And this kind of environment would lend itself to someone not having to purchase the car. And she really was not encouraged to do so because she knew she was going to be here for a short time with her affiliation with the university. But something like this would make it more
Right.
easily done for someone who's coming from maybe a larger city with a transit system if they don't need to purchase something to.
Or somebody who has stopped driving and needs a 1-story
Right.
apartment. Yeah, I think it looks
Well, thank you
great.
very much. I'm really encouraged with your insight and your guidance, and I'll work with Steve, and we'll see what we can come up with to move forward.
And I would suggest talking to the neighbors, see what
Yeah,
they
I
think.
will.
And maybe the Southside Community Association.
Okay.
Although I suspect they'd not be against this, to tell you the truth. But
Well,
that-
the
I can't
nice thing
speak for
is that it does have the buffer. I mean, large foothill there, the woods area. I walked it yesterday just to see how far it really does go, because the one lot that I purchased in December, I never really did walk all the way to the top of it. But it's a long way up there, and it's beautiful woods that we need to retain and keep them just as they are.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Did you want to say anything?
Okay, do we have communications?
I don't have any.
I would suggest that maybe we change the agenda from now on to have an opportunity for Paul to tell us anything he wants us to know.
Like a report from the planner?
Right.
We can make it a line item.
That's what I had in mind. Opportunity for citizens to speak about items not covered on the agenda. Anybody have anything they want to say? Okay. Announcements and other business. Next meeting is June 19th at noon.
Did you want to talk about?
Yeah, now we'll get to that. We talked about having a work session on the sign ordinance.
Oh, I see.
And I know what you,
Okay.
yeah. And I think we can, we'll come back to that. In April, we got a resolution from council asking us to make a recommendation to them about rezoning the lot in front of the depot on Union and Depot Streets, and to consider historical significance. And I asked Margaret Schaefer to come today. She's got some pictures of the depot in various incarnations. If we talk about historical significance, we wanted to sort of pick some period. It was built in 1890, and we don't have a picture of what it looked like then. Its appearance and the land around it has changed a lot over the years, and we need to know what period we're going back to. Paul, the mayor has some pictures of it when it had bonded oil in front of it, and you really could barely see the depot.
This is before the actual development of the time. Bonded in the carryout in front of it.
Yeah.
It was in the file. I pulled the file. You should have gotten in your packet some of the opinions and literature that went through in 1990. If you didn't have it in your packet already, I assume you guys got it. In particular, the opinion of 9007 from the law director Gary Hunter at the time, concerning some of the changes in the agreements, and in particular, we're looking at track F, which is what we're talking about. Did you get a copy of that? I hope you did. Yeah. Did you get it? Okay. Well, actually, I put it in the packet sometime just this past week. I think it's page 3 on this, basically, track F lease.
Yeah, there are two
There's,
leases.
yeah, there's also, there basically are 2 leases, agreements that are out there. But part of his ruling, his decision on what that actually meant in terms of that corner, which is the southwest corner of Union and Depot Streets. Did you get, I don't know if you guys got this as well.
Yeah, you gave me that
Okay,
one.
did anybody else get the background
get this
information
one?
agreement with the date of this?
And then the others, all the other stuff that
89.
came. Yeah, there was an 87, this is 87.
Okay. Well, I made extra copies just in case that didn't occur.
Just-
Is that it? Yes, it is. May 87.
Yeah.
Okay.
As far as the lease is concerned, it's under a 40-year lease with option to renew for 20 years, and again, a third renewal option after that 20 years for the remainder of the time on the other lease of the other land that has the apartments on it now. And so it seems to me that it's pointless to do a rezoning of it at this point, particularly because we don't have a category that would fit this. we have the law director's opinion and the lease, which both say clearly that parking is allowed on it. And the whole point of having that space reserved from buildings is to have the depot open to view from Union Street and Depot Street. And save it as open space, but also to allow parking. There is also a possibility of Mr. Tremblay's being able to bring in tracks and put tracks in front of the depot where they used to be. And Margaret, do you want to speak to this and show us the pictures?
I was not sworn in because I was...
Oh, okay, well, you swear, do you affirm that what you say will be the truth?
I do. I do have some pictures if I could bring them
Sure.
up. I was thinking when I was coming up, I found this one picture and then on the way uptown, it really brought back to mind what Athens was like because I left my office just before noon and tried to get up past Court Street and Union Street and students walking everywhere. Well, back in 1976, instead of the traffic, it was students trying to cross the railroad tracks. And that has nothing to do with this, but I just thought it was ironic.
Oh, yeah, this is by Clippinger now. Yeah, I remember this. I remember having to wait for this train. Yeah, I remember this.
I remember.
Another picture you would note, and talking about the area, this is a picture behind the depot is what it looked like.
What was it called? What was the name? Rosenberg.
Rosenberg.
Great junkyard, yeah. I can't remember
Salvage yard.
that. Salvage yard, sorry. We said.
Junkyard, excuse me. And then this is, I do have this, I'm not sure of the date, but I think that was in the 1890s when the Union Station first opened. It burned, and then it was rebuilt to look like this, and this would have been around 1990, 1920.
Victorian elements there.
And then in the 1950s and 60s, it was looking something like that. So I don't know if that will help you or not.
From Victorian
I have a newspaper article that when the B&O train station itself closed. Now, Amtrak did run after this date, but it was in May of 1971, and that's from the Messenger.
Yeah, how about
So, first of all, I would suggest that we tell council that since there's a lease in place, it's not appropriate to rezone this at this point. The lease clearly permits parking and our open space zoning doesn't. And the other thing that I've been thinking about since I talked to you, Paul, this is another brainstorm,
okay?
was that we probably need another zoning category to allow for historic preservation.
Well, there is some discussion. I talked to some of the environmental committee group that formed after the comprehensive plan, and they're looking at an open space planning scheme that does several things with the open space planning: cultural, historic planning, open space meaning like green parking, sort of open space, an ecological open space, and I forget what it's called, core or something. But they have examples of that, and they're working right now on doing that, and I was hoping to get them when they're ready to come and present it, so we can have like a really encompassing open space plan.
That sounds like a good idea, because I don't think we have anything at this point that's appropriate zoning for this to allow for the use for parking or railroad tracks or whatever.
Right, well, and there's a question of, there's an issue that's out there for a lot of people is open space, what does that mean? If it's just an absence of, right now you look at permeable surfaces, but for a lot of people, open space does not mean parking lots. And I think in this town, we have to be really cautious, because if we start identifying open space with the idea that we'll have nice green grass for kids to run around on, and we're not very specific about that, they'll be turned into paid parking lots. So
Well,
we
I
have
think,
to-
yeah, I think it needs to be specific, but the lease is
Right,
quite
the lease has
specific.
tied
that
our
this
hands
is, yeah.
in this particular case.
But it still would allow for changing the zoning to make it consistent with historic preservation and not necessarily require that it all be grassed, but allow parking in this particular case, because there was parking and there were railroad tracks.
Yeah.
And if Mr. Tremblay's intention is to restore it as much as possible to the way that it looked when it was a functional railroad station, then you've got to allow railroad tracks even if there aren't any trains on them.
Well, and there's a question of functional restoration and aesthetic restoration. If you wanted to truly restore it, you would restore it into an old ticket place, even though there's not a railroad station. I mean, I think that it also has to be something that is aesthetically pleasing and a benefit for the surrounding community, for the surrounding neighbors. And it's a opportunity to definitely have that area have some nice community space associated with it. And not just visual community space, but usable community space. So I'm hesitant, I'm concerned about parking.
Okay, part of the thing, again, looking at the ruling, the opinion of Gary Hunter, and again, it's page 3 saying, tract F lease, June 23, 1987. The lease of tract F was introduced to City Council under the ordinance 5487, which as you point out, the tract F is to be used for parking and green space in conjunction with the development of the Athens train station located on Athens Station project site. Interesting enough, if you look at the page 4 of that lease that he cites, which is the March 87 one, I assume that was what was referenced in the ordinance. That's page 4 at the top. Tract F shall be leased to the city developer for ingress and egress, including appropriate number of curb cuts for each Union Street depot, parking and landscaping for purposes in connection with the depot land. Interesting enough, it got changed kind of from green space to landscaping, but at the same time, the intent really, if I'm reading you correctly, Peg, two things are happening here. One is that we shouldn't be changing it while the lease is still in place. Two is that the parking and landscaping is important to retain that view and the openness.
Right.
And again, we do not have in our code anything in terms of, distinguishing, in the open space law between parking and not, so to speak, or paved
Right.
over.
Right.
Okay.
But I think we can rezone it and call it open space, but it's not going to, you can't make it apply till after the lease has expired.
And in terms of historical, I know that during the comprehensive plan there was discussion about historical overlay zones rather than actual zoning for historical areas. So like similar to a wellhead protection area or floodplain over there.
So we could do it that way.
Further down the road,
Yeah,
yes.
but it's still, at this point, I don't think there's any way to
Rezone
change
it.
a lease that's in force,
Okay, so.
no matter what we zone.
Okay, so really we should have a motion to get back to the city council.
Right.
That we're not going to change the zone on this, rezone it.
Right, that we recommend that the zone not be changed because there is a lease in place.
Okay.
And I think we need to say something about historic preservation, but the lease provides that land will not, nothing will be done on that land that will obscure the view of the depot.
As per the two agreements we're looking at, the ruling of Hunter and the agreement.
Right. So,
Well, I move that we don't change the zoning to open space because they're leased, and that we caveat the fact that it will stay open space in terms of, or rather, the view will not be blocked, and that we will follow the agreement of whatever it was, May 13th, 87?
87, yeah.
And,
Well, wouldn't it be that part of that be in the PUD process? That would be as a restriction in the PUD?
You're talking about the other section, right?
Yeah, it's not that part.
Okay.
It's not the part where the PUD is going to be.
I'm concerned that parking is, it may be historical that cars parked out in front of the depot, but in this day and time, with the massive amount of parking that's, being developed in so many areas of the city, that parking in exchange of green space is really not as beneficial for the depot or for the surrounding community.
Actually, a lot of it is not in green space now. A lot of it is still,
Yeah, it may be,
Hardtop.
well, it's hardtop, but that doesn't mean that it can't be made, what personally I think would be very beneficial for the depot and for the people who live at the depot and the future people and the new buildings at the depot, and the area around there is to have a pocket park, where you would have a nice area that has shade trees and other things, so that you can come down and enjoy part of the history of Athens, and not have cars right there, and not, cars, if you develop a green space, or you have some grass and cars in close proximity, it is not used as green space, it's used as stuff that gets mowed. I mean, I think that we've seen places that have been, put forward by the community, with the idea that it'd be a great benefit, but it's surrounded by cars. Pedestrians are intimidated by cars, so we need to keep our options open with that.
well, I think we can do it, but you can't.
I know, and it's unfortunate that the lease has tied our hands, and the lease,
Yeah.
maybe we need to make a note that before in 40 years, that the lease needs to be looked at again as per parking,
Well, actually, what, 20 years?
20 years.
Less.
No, it's, what?
Whenever the lease comes
40
up
years
again.
from 87, so
Yeah.
2027.
Because, I mean, in this town, my experience is if it can be turned into parking and money made off of it, that's what's,
Okay.
On the other hand, that's been possible since 1987,
right.
and it hasn't happened.
Well, that doesn't mean, there was Bob's for a long time too, and, that's going to turn into parking, so. I just, I think that I agree, I think the green space designation doesn't fit here, partially because of the lease, but also because our green space definition needs to be reworked. But I also caution against the idea that green space and parking are, the same thing, and that it's going to work out. So-
No, I think it's, no, I don't think green space and parking.
Right, but I mean, if there's parking green space, the de facto things, it turns out to be parking with some mowed strips next to it, unless it's specifically buffered and such, so.
Okay, is there a second to Paul's motion?
What is the motion?
Oh, the motion was not to rezone it to open
Yeah.
space, and rather, due to the fact that we have a lease that's in place right now, but to be aware of the considerations that is to be used for parking, landscaping, or green space, as per the agreement.
Okay, Harry seconds.
Do you want to discuss it some more?
Yes, any more
Okay.
discussion?
Again, right now, my point of view is that everything in front of, I go by there all the time, so everything in front of the depot site right now is technically paving, although the paving's pretty bad. It's not really more gravel than paving. Everything if you're spacing it, everything to the left is, that wedge there is actually grass. I do see people playing Frisbee on it and walking their dogs on it. I would like if there was a way to actually put a limitation on that, and that would be up to the PUD side of the equation at this point. to say, keep that green, that's, keep that grass, that's what I want to see. But, and in theory, that's already in here. The question is the interpretation of where the landscaping stops and where the parking starts, or vice versa. And that comes down to the PUD part of it, or the next development, in theory, that's being discussed at council, which we approved of the zoning change at that point.
Okay.
But, how do you feel? How do you feel? I haven't heard a word from you.
I understand what Christine's saying in terms of, and when you say parking and landscaping, that's so nebulous, but we're dealing with a document that's many years old. And the concern is that things will be built up and around and in front, and there goes our historic train depot, and the agreements weren't in place. So,
But they can't
Torn.
be because it says parking.
And the impact will be the other sections that we're talking about building, the PUD that's subsequent to come at us. And that's the thing we should be thinking about. That's the next one. That will control what happens in that space, really.
I want to, maybe this discussion's more to inform the property development in the future. I'm just very concerned, because I hear from people all the time about, there seems to just be so much parking, and you can landscape parking, sure. You can have a big parking lot there and have landscaping around it. I mean, that's potentially what can happen under this lease. It would be sad, because having a bunch of cars parked in front of that would, I think, detract from the aesthetic quality of the depot. You could do a really nice aesthetic job with parking, but mostly with landscape park in front of it that would enhance it. And so I just think when you have landscaping / parking, and maybe this needs to go back to the development of future leases in the city. We need to be more specific by what we need, So
Okay.
I understand the quandary. So.
And you see the legislative track record that
Yeah.
occurred with this little piece here.
So.
Anybody in the audience want to speak to this? Okay. Do we need to state the motion again? Would you
Can
read
you repeat it? Melissa, can you? Let's see what's been recorded here.
Okay, Paul made the motion that we recommend to council that due to the lease agreement in place since 1987, that we do not recommend rezone at this time. That we do need to look at it prior to the lease being renewed.
And I guess, again, that mentions that it is to be used for parking landscape.
I'd rather have that views of the depot be preserved, because that's the aim, and they have it as parking and landscaping.
Okay.
That's what really, we're trying to pin it down to preserving the views of the depot, including any development though.
I'd accept that as an amendment. I'm trying to think, I thought I saw something of that wordage in here, but I can't remember.
With all this paper?
All this.
Well,
Maybe not.
maybe Gary's opinion.
Maybe. I was looking through a 5-inch stack of this stuff, so it's quite possible.
Yeah, I think
something else.
maybe page 5 of Gary's opinion at the back, last paragraph. Therefore, it is my opinion that parking is permitted on tract F, so long as this parking is in conjunction with the development of the depot site. It is clear that once a residential and/or commercial development is constructed on the depot site, that the parking must be used for the residents, employees, guests, or patrons of that development. It also appears logical that since land acquisition and repair costs are part of development costs, that until the depot site is redeveloped as a residential and/or commercial project, the parking
No,
for
this is-
off-site activities, that was primarily talking about pay parking.
Yeah, no. I always thought there was something about this, the actual view of it, not so much viewscape, but something about it. Okay.
At any rate.
Oh. I mean, that's our interpretation, we can put it as our interpretation too.
All right, you got the amendment? Okay. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All those opposed?
No. I still have a hard time with it.
Okay.
Okay. You're allowed.
See, I'm still, you see, it's all boil over from Paul.
I know.
I've had more than an earful from people when they find out about that.
And again, I thank Steve for getting the packet that was this thick on all this stuff. And anybody who wants to look at it, of course, it's available. It's interesting reading.
Now, next thing that we were going to talk about was scheduling a work session on the sign ordinances. And after consulting with the mayor and consulting with Steve, what I suggest is that we ask the mayor to appoint a committee, a task force, whatever you want to call it, of 3 or 4 people to make recommendations on temporary sign, the temporary sign provisions, do a general review of sign height and size, do LED signs for size, brightness, and frequency of message change, and deal with flashing window signs that say open or beer or whatever they say. If the task force, we think ought to have somebody from the Neighborhood Association Executive Committee, somebody from the Chamber of Commerce, somebody from the Uptown Business Association, and I got a suggestion today that we ask somebody who is in business, sign business, like Mary Van Dyke, to be on that committee because they would have an idea of the sign size and so on.
That's Larry Van Dyke?
Yeah.
Okay.
And then maybe instead of having somebody from the city, you just ask somebody from the city to be a resource to the task force and ask them to bring back to us the provisions they would like to see changed.
Okay. More likely that being assigned for a planner.
Good.
Although he's only working part-time, we can keep him busy. I noticed when we discussed things Tuesday, I think it was, the other one was political science, which Pat was working on.
Pat's working on a
And,
constitutional one about political science.
And the balloons and inflatable
Yeah.
figures.
And I would just suggest that we have a change in that to say that balloons, air or gas-filled balloons no larger than 15 inches in diameter can be put up with a permit 2 days before an event and taken down 2 days after the event.
So it'd be changing it, what is in existence now, they're considered, I think, temporary signs, really, in one sense.
Now, will that give you definite, on the, say that the fee for the permit will be set by council? Does that give you enough to work with?
Well, the problem right now is balloons and inflatables are prohibited signs,
Except when allowed by the,
except when permitted.
Yeah.
And then it has no criteria
Yeah,
on
well,
what
this-
you would use to judge, can
This
it be
gives you-
permitted
yeah.
or will it not be permitted?
Well, this gives you permits, gives you grounds for permitting if it's for a specific event with a
Right.
date.
Administratively, that's what we're doing now. We're allowing balloons. I think people may have wondered why they have seen balloons at a couple locations in town. Those have been permitted in relationship to the 4 regularly permitted 30-day events that you're allowed to have. So yeah, if you can tie it some way to an activity that already needs to be permitted and say that balloons can be permitted as part of that event, that'll make it a lot easier. Because now you have people who will say, well, their balloons are prohibited, why would you permit them? So, as an administrator, kind of puts you in
And
an
if we
awkward
say
situation.
15-inch diameter, is that big enough?
What's the biggest size Kroger sells?
I don't know.
Because, I mean, that's the biggest size somebody would put out for a birthday or something. You don't want to have to
You
get
don't
them.
have to have a permit for a birthday.
Right,
Yeah,
right.
we're
But
talking
if
about-
you- Like, if you get the biggest size from Kroger's, and nobody else can go running around buying special balloons for birthdays.
What I was thinking about was gorillas and things like that.
Yeah. there is a-
If you wanted to essentially prohibit the large inflatables,
Mhm.
you could do that by limiting, that dimension. That would take care of it.
Well, we can check with Kroger's and see
Okay.
what size.
In terms of appointing a task force, we'll put it out to the Neighborhood Association Chamber and the Uptown Business. I'll be gone next week, but at the same time, I guess it'll be an opportunity to.
Oh, Chris, yes.
This may have already been taken care of under temporary signs, but I know League of Women Voters had a question when they put out educational signs about candidates' forums this fall, so maybe we could look at the guidelines for that at the same time.
Yeah.
Because currently I don't think we've got any definition that quite fits those signs. They're not political, they're educational.
Right. Can it be under temporary signs?
When the League of Women Voters sponsored some events, I think, at the library, there was a discussion about how could those be advertised throughout the town with, little signs that essentially were going to be like for sale signs, about that size. Didn't fit really well because the definition of an educational sign, which this could be considered to be educational, didn't fit. So you couldn't look at those regulations because the definition didn't fit. I'm not sure. Somehow or other we got around it and got permits for them, but it may have been under special signage. That's how we did it, because there's a little section that allows for quite a bit of administrative latitude. Special signage for, let me see, I can actually read it to you. Let's see.
Temporary
Yes.
project, freestanding signs?
It's the last thing under Section T, exemptions to the regulations. Number 5, special signage determined by the zoning administrator to be reasonable, considering the intent and regulation of the chapter. So I think the way, as I recall, the way we looked at it was, if a real estate sign was permitted to be 5 square feet, and, that was with the permission of the property owner, would this not be, basically the same thing? The intent is not to have, for example, 2 large signs in an R1 zone, or to have lighted signs, and these weren't too large or lit. So I believe that we may have squeezed it into that section.
And if that's workable, then that's fine. I just remember us coming out of the forums thinking, did we need to do anything additional?
I think what we required to was that where the sign was placed, the permission of the property owner or the owner of property adjacent to where the sign was being placed in the public right-of-way was obtained. So in other words, you didn't just plant a sign in front of somebody's house and they really didn't want it to be there. So I think those were the contingencies. 5 square feet and permission of the adjacent property owner or the property owner.
I had a question. After reading Goldsberry's ruling about the temporary for-lease signs with Wharton,
Right.
why are there so many for-lease signs that are up now, like Procos? I get a huge amount of comments about our neighborhood is looking really tacky because there's all these for rent signs that are on the house all the time. And I'm just wondering how it's being, if Goldsberry found that those are temporary signs and that they should be taken down, even though Wharton argued that the leasing process goes on forever, why are they up? Sort of things.
And essentially, we're looking at 230313 L3, real estate signs, temporary real estate signs, freestanding signs, wall signs may be permitted for sale, for rent, for lease premises, part of the premises on which the sign is displayed. Illumination shall not be permitted. Such signs shall be removed within 14 days of the closing date of sale property or occupancy by tenant. If I read that by the strict law, and if the place is occupied, there should be any sign. And if the place is always occupied, there should never be a sign. I mean,
So-
that's an interpretation, I guess, right?
But I think that there's a legitimate question about, because they have been proliferating, and they've been seeming to get bigger, and it looks like, the whole town is, I know the whole town is for rent, but, it's just, the little signs that they were talking about with Wharton were these little green signs, which compared to some of them are kind of innocuous, but it's just a question of why is not the code being enforced? And so I think that that's something that I don't know where that comes under, if it's under the subcommittee, or you need to look at
Actually,
what's going.
administration, it's
you know,
my job.
Your job. It's just a question.
I'm sorry, it's my job. I'll write it down, task.
So,
And I see Paula's writing it down too. And I-
So if you get the task force formed, why don't you ask them to come back in, since this seems to be a popular time, 60 days to the, with recommendations to
Okay.
the planning commission. And it'll work much more efficiently than if we sit here and try to do it by the committee of the whole.
Okay. What I'll do is I'll send out emails to the neighborhood associations and chamber I can get in touch with. Uptown Business Association's meeting next week. I will not be there, but it'll be perk to them. And as I said, business, and I don't know Mr. Van Dyke, but I guess I could contact him as well. And maybe I'll have Paula put it coordinated.
Great.
60 days may be a short time, but at least it's a start. I don't know what they'll come up with in 60 days, but it'll be a start.
Well-
And I know the flashing signs, when you say window signs, you're talking about actually changing legislation now that signs behind the window. Technically, before anything behind a display window is not,
But it's not supposed to flash.
oh, that's true too. It's not
Yeah,
supposed to
it's the
flash.
flashing I was talking about.
Okay.
I mean, you have to have a sign that says open or closed and so on, that's fine.
It's a.
But it doesn't have to say open, open, open.
Okay. Do we have cases of that in town right now?
Are there cases of that in town?
Cases of,
Flashing open signs?
sure there is.
there shouldn't be.
There shouldn't be. I didn't think anything flashing is allowed.
Okay, okay.
No. Now, that doesn't mean that, I'm not here all night long when they're real visible.
After dark, they may flash.
Yeah, but,
Flicker with the power outage.
yeah.
It's not that bad.
Although, let me back up a little bit. I was in town last weekend in the evening, and there are signs that I noticed that are burning without flashing that say open during the day. But at night, when the code office is closed up, they seem to be flipped to flash. So I'll have somebody or myself do a little weekend work here pretty soon and just copy the section of the code that does exist. It says even if a sign is inside of a building, it can't flash, whirl, spin, do anything like that.
Maybe that's something to mention to the uptown businesses too, just as a FYI, They can, and self-policing is good. It'd be nice to do more self-policing of some of these organizations, sort of.
Okay.
Okay, disposition of minutes?
Please say. Steve has more.
Couple things if I could. I did happen to speak to Larry Van Dyke, owner of Performance Signs, yesterday, and made him aware that a task force was being formed. He did indicate that he might have some interest in doing that as being an industry representative.
Okay.
So
That would be great.
Larry already kind of knows about that.
Okay, great.
Another thing I'd like to mention too, for at least a couple years, I've pointed out to the Planning Commission 230313L3 temporary real estate signs and the problem with enforcing that. It's not lack of enforcement. I think, as I've stated, it allows for wall signs and freestanding signs up to 5 square feet. And there is, because of this language, when is a place for lease? It basically says you don't have to have a permit to do it, and it only has to stay down for 14 days.
What section now again? 2303,
It's the-
13,
The real estate sign
Yeah,
part.
L3.
L3. Okay, but, yeah, but I don't see the size.
Within 14 days.
Shall be removed within 14 days. Yeah,
Sale property occupied by tenant. So if you knock on the door, there's a tenant, and 14 days later, there's a sign there, that sign should be down. No?
Well, no, what I'm saying is what happens on day 15.
Day 15, there's still a tenant in there, isn't it?
Still occupied.
Still occupied. My house is for sale. Did you know my house is for sale? Someday I will die, The house is still going to be there, the land is still going to be there, the land outlasts me. Someday my house will be for sale. Day 15 from now, the house will be for sale. If I close on tomorrow, day 15, the house will be for sale 100 years from now. Or the lot will be for sale, whatever's there will be for sale. I guess I should have a for sale sign up. I mean, if we take that to that extreme, every real estate sign can stay up forever as well. Because real estate doesn't go away. The sale of real estate doesn't go away.
Well, but if you've got an apartment building and all the apartments are full, should you still be able to have a sign that says, now leasing, now renting, for lease, for rent?
Forever.
On the sign, on the outside of the building, when you don't have anything available?
You shouldn't.
It may be something for clarification from the law director, I
Yeah.
think is what.
I think that's-
Steve is.
It's a question, though, I mean, I think right now what's happening is the landlords are saying, oh, well, it's always for lease. You know, if you want to sign up for 2010, 2011 school year, then let's do it. And it's, you know, a way of, I mean, it's advertising in a way that doesn't seem consistent with what's on the, I mean,
So probably we need to ask the law director to
yes.
look at it.
It's just, and it's proliferating, and there just seems to be more and more.
Actually, if anything, I'd probably look at the intent, the start of the sign ordinances and the intent. I thought it was to do something about aesthetics and make it a little bit cleaner. Not that I have that section with me in front of me.
Yeah.
But I seem to recall there's some wordage about that.
And it seems that Goldsberry's opinion, when you read it, it's pretty explicit about this idea that, you know, leasing it is a continual effort. So I think that, yeah, maybe Pat Lang needs to just, so.
The distinction, one of the distinctions in Judge Goldsberry's decision had to do with, was it off-site advertising? That's why I had originally cited, I think it was 70 or 80 properties, that the signs were not temporary real estate signs, that they were off-site advertising signs. The zoning board upheld my decision. The Common Pleas Court upheld my decision. However, in that decision, it did, as you mentioned, point out that temporary real estate signs were permitted. And essentially, from that decision, that's how we've had this thing from managed by has gone away, and for rent has gone up, because it was illustrated that that was a permitted sign. Now they've kind of changed, and even though they say for rent, are they really off-site advertising, or is the place, you know, really for rent? So, I mean, I'd be real happy if, you know, the language was clear and it was enforceable.
Okay.
I mean, that's all I'm trying to point out. That's what I'm
Okay,
trying to point out.
but again, the real estate signs, okay, if I'm reading this correctly, let's see if I can find where it starts so it makes sense. The appellant clearly argues that the Athens City Code 230313O contains language clearly pertinent to the removal of real estate signs, but is ambiguous to respect to the removal of rental signs. He argues that any ambiguity must be resolved in his favor. The ambiguity referred to by the appellant, if it exists, is immaterial. Under Athens City Code, the subcategory of real estate signs falls in the general character of temporary signs. See Athens City Code 13013D1B and 230313O. By clear, unambiguous definition, temporary signs, including a subcategory of real estate signs, are those that have a limited period of time. Therefore, because they're admitted permanency, the appellant signs cannot be qualified as real estate signs. So they're not signs, but they're
They're not
supposed to be
temporary
temporary.
signs,
Yes.
right.
So to adopt the appellant's view, this would equate permanence to with temporary. The result cannot be countenanced under any reading of the Athens City Code. To my mind, what I'm looking at here is that, you know, basically the things thrown in this ruling, you know, covers everything from is it a nameplate sign, is it a wall sign, is it, you know, but it is temporary, it's supposed to be temporary.
So we need to ask for law directors opinion.
I
Well,
guess we
either
can
that
How to enforce it.
or go out and
rewrite it.
give them a bunch of citations and let them take it to court, and it will be that way. I mean, it seems that we're letting them try to manipulate the system and say that they're for lease forever, and you know, that's just that's not appropriate, you know, so. And I think that.
Okay, is that page 9 you're talking about? Appellant argues that each of the subject properties is a site of business, i.e. residential, and the signs are merely on-site advertisements for each particular business. Again, this boils down to whether for lease signs can remain up permanently. The court holds that it cannot. And this is, of course, when he's addressing the idea of a business on-site sign.
Right. So I would encourage the more narrow interpretation of Goldsberry's in terms of protection of aesthetics as opposed to when leasing starts or not.
Okay, I will shoot something to Pat Lang and have him look at that, as well as reference the another task. Okay.
Okay. Disposition of the minutes. I had 2 or 3 amendments to them, including in case
Where the easement-
0810,
That's
on the second page. The mayor made the motion to approve the lot split, and Harry Kanashika seconded it. Up above, there was one house on the .468 lot that was signed off on by a planning commission a couple of months ago. It was signed off on by Steve, right? Mr.
Pardon me?
Rinaldi?
Yeah.
We didn't remember, we said we couldn't remember it. And
No,
then
it
it turned out that
It was signed
didn't
off by a
come to-
planning commissioner,
Oh.
not by me. The minor
No,
lot split, is that what you're referring to?
The first one.
In the plains, Rinaldi's first lot split.
Rinaldi's first lot.
Oh, on John Rinaldi's?
Yes.
Yeah,
Paula signed off on that one,
yeah, okay.
as a
Okay,
planning,
so-
on behalf of the planning commission,
Okay. Oh, all right.
not me.
Prior to the
No, this
first,
was a long time ago, the first
This was,
the first one. That caused him so much trouble.
Are you talking about the Rinaldi case?
not the one that just came to us, but there was a previous one.
He bought the property, split one lot off,
Happened
and
in-
realized he didn't have enough room for the second.
Yeah,
Right, the
it
appro-
happened
the
in
re- the-
January.
right. No, it didn't occur in January.
Okay, well,
The approval and the refusal, I think, were both signed the same day.
For the first,
for the first one.
Mhm.
But not,
not by the planning commission, is what she's saying.
By a planning commissioner,
all right,
Planning
okay.
commissioner.
Okay.
not by the planning commission,
Okay,
no.
but I wasn't even on the planning commission. We
So,
should
Ray-
I'm going to have to
probably
check your
clarify.
minutes. I
Yeah.
never get a copy of them to
Okay.
see exactly what you're talking
okay.
about, or
Well,
what the
it's
minutes say.
It's the paragraph about the Rinaldi case, and remember, we had a discussion at that time about there had been a previous case that affected that same property that had been disposed of, and I didn't remember it, and Harry didn't remember it.
Right.
And it was, I think it was before January.
No, it was not.
Wasn't? It was this year?
Mhm.
Okay, well, it didn't come to us. It turned out, it didn't come to us. So if you would
Right.
take a look, then we can correct that part of the minutes later, but it's confusing. So, all right, I'll just X out this part, Melissa, just ignore it. And the only other thing that I thought should be changed is we need the proper name of the archaeological conservancy that took title to, that's going to take title to that lot on the plains with the mound. And I don't
Put
know
that in
what
the minutes.
it is.
Archaeological, yeah. What is
Yeah,
it? Yeah.
it's an archaeological conservancy or something, but I'm not sure
It
that's
should have
its
fallen
proper
name.
title. Yeah,
Yeah, just in case somebody wants to find out who did it.
just, that's all.
Out of New Mexico.
Yeah, okay,
I'm not sure,
okay.
but yeah.
Okay.
Um,
So, any
I
other?
move that we approve, did we approve this and vote on it yet?
Not yet. Are there any other changes?
Do you have any?
No, I do want to say what Steve may be referring to as the previous division of land may have been signed off as service safety director because it did not require any variances, it met all the requirements.
Okay.
We'll get that resolved.
Okay.
What
That
I
was-
pointed out before was, you have a 5-day time limitation on a minor subdivision.
I
or
know,
lot split, and
yeah.
you meet no earlier than every 14
Right.
14 days or more. So administratively, there has to be some way to take action.
Yeah, that's fine, it's just that we didn't remember having done
Right.
it.
No, you didn't hear it as a
Okay,
case.
that's fine. Okay,
I move we adopt the minutes
Okay.
with the amendments.
second?
I'll second.
All
I'll be
those in-
positive about something.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, anybody move for
I'll
adjournment?
move to adjourn.
Okay, you're adjourned.
See you in 2 weeks.
Okay.